thank you for all your contributions today. Now, you're either all running or representing very successful businesses in what you do. If we step back for a second and think about contributions of businesses to developing sustainable walkable cities, how do you think about it in the future? Do you think, what is the role and contributions of businesses? Maybe any one of you can start, and then we can go around a little bit.
Okay. Well, I think it's quite clear in our presentation. MTR as a business, we do contribute an awful lot to the walkability. I suppose the key word is always how do we connect the first and the last mile by having people either in their schools, offices, their homes, how they get to their transportation and get them around. We will continue to invest into something like this, and let's hope that the transit-oriented development model can continue to be adopted here in Hong Kong, and also we can have much wider application in other countries around the world, and we will be pleased to share our expertise.
Thank you, David. Alexander?
Yeah, I was thinking, I was invited to speak at the International Downtown Association. A lot of real estate developers and property owners were gathering, talking about how to revitalize downtown. And I was shocked how many times they used the word walkability. It was just 1 year ago. It was so amazing that this came from the business community of these downtowns to say that if we push this thing, if we push out cars and pull in people, that will be the best business strategy for us. So I think businesses will actually not be the problem. maybe other limitations that we have in terms of legislation and so on.
I think as businessmen and as investors, we want to make money. But when there is a confluence of interests and there is also clear regulation and the incentives are aligned, it's possible for the partnership to happen. So it's a bit of a stick and carrot approach, but when it's reasonable and it's well expected, it's something that businesses will be part of this game.
Evan, I think that's a very interesting question. I think the private sector is very good at efficient use of resources, and public sector probably less good at that, to put it kindly. But I think when you're talking about the built environment, you're talking about cities, I would never leave the private sector to its own devices. And I think whether it's a Hong Kong, whether it's elsewhere, the private sector, property developers in particular, I think have been shown time and again to actually not serve and be very value destructive in terms of public good, social good, et cetera, and we're kind of seeing the brunt of that. I think an interesting, or perhaps if I could suggest, you're the moderator, not me, I'd be interested, like if we wanted to quantify kind of the pieces, it involves a multitude of stakeholders, the private sector being one of those. I think it'd be an interesting thought exercise to try to quantify, well, how much public versus private versus, consumers versus interest groups, for, et cetera. I think that would be kind of an interesting way to look at it.
So maybe I sound overly optimistic, but of course, the outcome of the future study that I did, it's kind of interesting that what kind of future that people wanted was actually the futures that were most regulated. So it's not, I'm not saying free market city, let the market free. It's just saying that we see so much good signs that walkability creates value, that we can really use businesses and property developers to to go into that walkable future. And of course, that has to be regulated and planned and so on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also, obviously, from Alexander, from Ben, there's more than just the private sector interest that can actually propel the development of walkable cities and sustainable cities. But also, maybe from your words, you may be looking for some sort of regulation to spur this on. Is this good for business, or with businesses such as MTR is already on the path of doing that? So should there be more regulations? Maybe I'll start with David again.
Regulations are by their nature is always not good, because it tells you that we don't have any discipline. Personally, I need to be very careful now, not speaking on behalf of MTR. Personally, I do not believe in regulations, government intervention. I think the market, I think mankind, we will always find a way. And if it is done well, it will find its way through. Regulations always will, as always, as all things in life, right? When you try to regulate some things, it means that because you're trying to make a correction, so you try to swing the pendulum back to the other way. But once you've done that, always you're swinging the pendulum too far to the other side, and it then doesn't work. And also take away the flair of designers, academics, and idealists in our society.
Thank you, David. Very clear. Ben, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm keen to just keep things exciting at this late hour of the day, take an opposing view, which is, I think if there's anything that we're seeing in cities universally across the globe today, it is huge income and growing income inequality. Young people who are extremely frustrated and frankly very cynical about capitalism. I think a world without regulation would not work. Certainly would not work. I'm happy to take that other point of view. I think, you know, as with any regulation and any good intentions, the devil will be very much in the detail. And I think, you know, again, being from the private sector, being from property, a property company, where we see it most evident is in housing, actually, not in retail or commercial and so on, where, and I'd be interested to hear the MTR view, housing in particular is, and the built environment, and in big cities you have housing, a huge issue of housing unaffordability. I think, again, you know, we're not going to sort of turn capitalism on its head, but how one regulates housing markets in the world. You know, Singapore, a great example of government HDB housing. Hong Kong, a different take. One of the think tanks in Hong Kong yesterday came up with a new piece, a new white paper on housing in Hong Kong, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think it is, you know, how one regulates. I don't think absence of regulation is at all possible.
I'm absolutely with Ben on this. I think that the way in which you regulate and the simple metrics which you put forward are important. Like the FAR ratio, for instance, is the incentive that allows the developer to put in place the affordable housing and make that connection. So without regulation, it's a free for all, and we've seen that happen as well.
So the result of our market analysis, looking at what the willingness to pay for different kind of housing, it's obvious that it is public space that drives value, and it's parks and streets and public transport. And in my mind, these common goods can never be created by the market. They are created by planning authorities, because streets connect, and they should be public in that sense. So I think we have to understand that people are looking for these walkable environments, and the unaffordability problem is actually an effect of the lack of walkability. So why are the prices skyrocketing in central San Francisco? and Stockholm and everywhere, because we have too little of walkable environments and in the housing market. So there's a huge responsibility when it comes to governments and planning authorities to plan and raise the supply of walkable places.
Okay, thank you. With that, we're out of time, but we can, obviously, panelists will be around and answer any questions. I encourage you to meet them and talk to them a little bit more, but for now, I need to turn over the floor because it says 0-0. Thank you very much. May I have a round of applause for our panelists for sharing their experience and insight today. Thank you.